Welcome to another episode of the Grace and Grit Unfiltered podcast. This is a podcast where we have uncensored conversations about politics, about faith, about leadership, about those things that concern us. Tonight, we want to take a look at the DEI hustle and the power of ownership. So, when we look, we see with this new presidential administration, there is this big push on the rollback of DEI. And it simply proves one thing that inclusion is not empowerment. The two are not synonymous with one another. Because you are included in something, that does not necessarily mean that you are empowered. And uh, we have to look at it for what it is. Corporations begin to engage in DEI, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion, uh, because it was something that they could capitalize on. We have to remind ourselves that in America, we are in a system of capitalism, and what's being done is right in its name. Businesses, individuals are capitalizing on needs. They are capitalizing on sentiments. They are capitalizing on the people, if you would. And I'm not saying that being in a socialist society is the best. I do believe that there should be uh, some cohesion between various economic systems because uh, believing on the Lord and understanding how Jesus operated, the strong held up the weak. Those that had helped those that didn't have. And it wasn't so much that they were giving handouts, but they were actually trying to bring the people along so that they could lift themselves up. I don't believe that the answer is hefty giveaways. I do believe that the answer is empowerment. But unfortunately, many of us as people of color, we fell for the okie doke. Let's just call it what it is. Because it was during the time of the killing of George Floyd. And we had this racial trauma. And George Floyd is the one that's nationally known. That was the one that was made popular. But we also had the killing of Elton Sterling. And there was a public outrage. There was a public outcry because what you saw was a racial disparity. You saw not just these two men that I mentioned, but we had Trayvon Martin. We had many other black people during this time that were being killed by the police, right, wrong, or indifferent. These things were happening. So there was a sentiment throughout the nation that these things were wrong. You had the advent of BLM, Black Lives Matter, and this was a cry that was going out nationwide. It was not just black people, but it was all races that looked at the injustice that was being done to a particular race of people in this nation that was brought to the forefront. And corporations saw this. People like Target saw this. People like Walmart saw this. And they capitalized on this national sentiment of Black Lives Matter. And it was a good opportunity for the bottom line to be increased because you had Black businesses that were uh, catered to because of this. You had other minorities that basically kind of fell in line with what was going on at the time, and they were grabbing hold to this diversity, equity, and inclusion. But with the new administration and with the new national sentiment around this thing, we're finding out that it was empty, it was hollow, it was really nothing uh substantive to it. And now we have this fallout where many of our religious leaders in the black community, in the black church, they have sponsored boycotts. They wanted to boycott Target for pulling back on DEI uh, and everybody wanted to stop buying. You know, they wanted to show the power of the black dollar on February 28th. And while I understood the sentiment, the problem that I had with it was I understand that math is commutative. So then if I have $1,000 that I'm going to put into my account, does it matter if I put $500 in that account today and another $500 in that account tomorrow when it's all going to the same account? Just because I don't buy my grits on the 28th, does that not mean that I'm not going to those same stores on March 1st to buy those same grits that I didn't buy? You know, so it wasn't, like I said, I understood the sentiment, but the rationale behind it, I thought was flawed, and I still believe that it's flawed. History shows us that when Black people build independently, we thrive. But that success is often met with backlash. So, why are we still asking for seats at the table that we don't own? You know, Jesus actually gives us some wisdom where he says, when you are invited to a feast, don't show yourself to the front, lest somebody that's more honorable than you shows up and you're asked to step down. We have been trying to, we've been asking for a seat at the table, but history has shown us that when we do our own thing, and I'm thinking of two examples. One is uh, Black Wall Street, where in Tulsa, Oklahoma, you had black businesses, you had black people that built their own. They owned their banks, they owned their businesses. There was an excellence to these people, to the chagrin and the envy of many of their white contemporaries, so much so that these cities were burned down. Um, Rosewood, because you had black people that were thriving and that they were operating in excellence and they were building their own. These Rosewood was burned down. So history shows us that we are a resilient people and we are an industrious people, but yet uh, we have been met with backlash on every turn. And even now, what we are seeing in America is what I call a part of the Obama effect, because you had an individual, a person of color, who was articulate, he was intelligent, he was charismatic, he was thoughtful. And yes, this man had his flaws because he's a man. But at the same time, he embodied something that many people, even today, still are not able to swallow. I say this all the time. We still live in a generation where people looked at my mother a certain way because she was a black woman. People looked at my grandmother a certain way because she was a black woman. And we are just over 50 years removed from the civil rights movement. So we can't expect for a sentiment that has been ingrained in a nation to uh, be eradicated instantly. There was this ignorant saying that uh, racism doesn't exist because we had a black president. Okay, I think we have proven with the uh, election of Donald Trump that there is still racism in America. There is still sexism in America, because in 2016 we had a qualified white woman who had been a senator. She had been married to a president. She was the Secretary of State, but yet people did not vote for her, or uh, she didn't win the way she needed to win in order to attain the seat of power. And we put President Trump in office back then. we saw the mishandling of various national crises and a lot of things that were going on, and we went back to the establishment because the establishment was that this nation has been run for centuries by old white men. And now we see where uh, in 2020, Joe Biden and Donald Trump ran against each other. And I was flabbergasted during that time because I saw something happen. Um, I can't remember the man's name now, but he was a Republican candidate. He was a black man. And uh, it turns out he, some sexual harassment allegations surfaced about him and Herman Cain. And when these allegations came out, this man went into the abyss, and we didn't hear anything more about Herman Cain until he was dead. That was the last thing we heard about Herman Cain. But yet, we elected a man who there was audio recordings of him admitting to sexually assaulting women. But yet, this was somebody that we elected. And that I do believe was a part of the Obama effect because in this nation, when Black people have thrived, there has been some backlash. So then uh, we look at DEI, and the bottom line is DEI was a scam because it was a corporate money grab. Again, in 2020, corporations, they pledged billions of dollars on racial equity. But where did that go? Where did that go? And I've been seeing reports how the people that we thought were benefiting from DEI weren't really the overwhelming majority of people that were benefiting from DEI. But yet, again, that was something that was brought to the forefront during a time that there was a sentiment around Black Lives Matter. There was a sentiment around trying to include people of color, minorities, if you would. And that shifted. They never intended to shift power. And it was just about controlling the narrative. It was about calming outrage. It was about keeping business stable because we had all types of protests that were going on during this particular time. And it was something to appease the masses, it was something to quiet the noise. Even now, I was looking and I saw on the news on yesterday, and I think it was the news. I don't know where I saw it, but basically, they were tearing up in Washington D.C. They were tearing up uh, the pavement of BLM, Black Lives Matter. They were tearing that pavement up, and the mayor gave some mea culpa as to why this needed to change, and they were renaming it Liberty Square. I mean, that says something. We have to begin to start looking at and listening to the code language that we're being given. So uh, let's call it for what it is. DEI was a scam. It was a corporate money grab. And now that it's no longer beneficial to those corporations, now all of a sudden we're rolling it back. And I'm not going to speak on affirmative action and all of those other things because I do believe, like the late James Brown said, I don't want nobody to give me nothing. Just open up the door and get it myself. Give me an opportunity to get it. But at the same time, I also have to be willing to put forth the effort. I have to be willing to put forth the work. And I can't expect people just to give stuff to me because I'm a Black person. I can't expect people just to give stuff to me because there are certain things that are going on that's convenient for them at a particular point in time. One of my favorite songs is by James Brown, where he says, I don't want nobody to give me nothing. Open up the door, I'll get it myself. And he said, don't give me integration, give me true communication. Keep it real with me. He says, don't give me sorrow. I want equal opportunity to live tomorrow. Give me schools, give me better books so I can read about myself and gain my truly looks. I don't want nobody to give me nothing. Just open up the door. I'll get it myself. And the problem, I believe, is that we have been looking for people to give us things. But when we haven't been looking for folks to give us things and we actually have been building our own, that's when we've thrived. Was there some backlash to it? Yes, because in the success of others, there are some other people that will get intimidated. uh Deion Sanders is quote, he got a bunch of quotes, right? But one of the things that he says that I like, he says, don't allow my success to intimidate your insecurity. Just because I'm making moves, just because things are happening for me, because you're insecure, don't be intimidated by that. Shake yourself and start doing on your own. Look within yourself to see what your abilities is, what your abilities are. The Bible tells us that God gives to every man several abilities. Each person has a particular gift from God. Each person has certain leanings that they have been given from birth. So then we need to begin to discover, okay, what has been put in me? What skills do I have? What talents do I have that I can capitalize on for myself and not be capitalized on? I say this all the time. A people that do not think for themselves will be ruled by the people that think for them. So then, now again, now that DEI is no longer profitable, they are abandoning it. And that should tell us something. That should tell us that we were a convenience. And we should be offended by that. Not so much to the point that we cut off our nose to spite our face, because the bottom line, if I'm hungry, if I need some grits, I'm going to get my grits. if I if I need some bacon, I'm going to get my bacon. And I'm not going to hurt myself trying to hurt somebody else. But at the same time, we have to understand that we are more than able to build for ourselves. We are more than able to support ourselves. But many times we continue to fall for the okie doke. So let's look at another situation where if we talk about the danger of dependency. So I watched, as well as many of you, I'm sure, also watched, when our president, President Trump, basically berated with many of his cronies in the Oval Office, President Zelensky. Now there are some varying narratives out about Zelensky and him basically posturing for certain things. But the bottom line is, this man is the president of a nation that has been attacked by a neighbor. And they are a weaker nation, and they have asked a stronger nation to be their ally and to help them. But when we saw President Zelensky in the Oval Office trying to ask for help with a ceasefire, because this has been going on for 3 years now. And the previous administration was trying to help without getting too involved. And I understand that part of it. But at the same time, uh, Ukraine's reliance on the US aid left Zelensky vulnerable. So then when power dynamics shifted, so did his leverage. You had one leader that was on board with trying to help them, with trying to give them funds, trying to give them the means to defend themselves. And then you have another leader who, in a matter of hours, shifted the entire narrative. But because Zelensky was dependent on somebody else to help him, when the dynamic shifted, the power dynamic shifted, so did his leverage. So there's a lesson there. When you depend on another system, you're at that system's mercy. I'm reminded of the scripture that says that the borrower is servant to the lender. So then if I'm asking you for help, then I become your servant. The scripture tells us that there was a woman who her husband died and he had creditors, and she essentially had to sell her sons into slavery in order to pay the debt that her husband left. So then we have to be cognizant of the positions we allow ourselves to get in when we are dependent on another system, because then we are at that system's mercy. And that's exactly what happened with DEI. Corporations used it while it benefited them, and now they're discarding it. We need to stop looking for external validation and start controlling our own resources. I've heard reports of the trillions of black dollars that are spent in America, and a lot of the things that we spend it on is not necessarily investments. They are more liabilities. They're not things that have a return on them, but rather things that continue to deplete. And we are enriching others while we ourselves are being fleeced. And we need to begin to pay attention to that. There was a time that we were proud enough people. Now, understand there's a delicate balance with pride, because the Bible tells us that pride goeth before destruction and a haughty spirit before a fall. But at the same time, we have to understand our power. We have to understand the ability that is in us to do for ourselves. So then, to look at when we built our own Black success and the backlash from Black success. Black Wall Street, as I mentioned earlier, it was a thriving Black economy, and it was destroyed out of envy. Rosewood, Florida, it was a self-sufficient Black town that was burned to the ground over false accusations. Freedman's Bank was a Black financial independence. Black financial independence was undermined by corruption. You have hip hop and Black creativity. It's $1 billion industry that was started by us, but now it's owned by corporations. What's the pattern? Every time we create something powerful, the establishment either destroys it or co-ops it. And we are so thirsty, we don't recognize the value of a lot of what we have. And we end up selling ourselves short. And I'm going to just go ahead on and say it. We end up selling out. So then we need to look at ownership over inclusion. What's the real solution? Ownership over inclusion. Again, DEI was never the answer. It was a distraction from real power, and it put us in a position of being pick-me's, as in I'm so glad you picked me. I'm glad you gave me this opportunity. And what we have to begin to understand and realize, that we have to capitalize in certain opportunities. If we, as a people, and I'm talking not just Black, not just brown people, I'm talking we as a people that hold this nation together, because the nation is not held together by those rich ones at the top. It's controlled by the rich ones at the top, but the nation is held together by the people that's under them. And we have to begin to understand our power. We have to begin to understand the influence, even the authority that we have. We can't be ignorant. One of the refrains that the Apostle Paul has in a lot of his epistles, he says, "Brethren, I would not have you ignorant." And we have to begin to educate ourselves on a lot of the things that are going on. Don't get caught up by the flash paper that's there, where they do one thing on this side to get you distracted, but yet the real thing is going on where you're not looking. Inclusion is not the goal. Control over our businesses, schools, and institutions is the goal. And I'm not talking about a 21st century segregation. I'm talking about us beginning to speak with the power that we have. And the power that we have is our dollar. The power that we have is our ingenuity. Our ingenuity. The power that we have is our resilience. The power that we have is our ability to understand. Because in all of our getting, we need to get understanding. We can't allow ourselves to be ignorant. The Bible talks about, it says that the children of this world are in their generation wiser than the children of light. And what Jesus was telling us with that example was, you need to understand the system that you operate in. Rather than trying to assimilate, rather than trying to appease another system that you would only be beholden to, you need to understand the system that you have. Because they know their system, they the ones that created it. We have to begin to understand our power. We have to begin to understand our resolve, our intellect. We have to begin to appreciate ourselves and understand that we are fearfully and wonderfully made, and we are a prize to anybody. We're not some pick me. We're not some people, I'm just so glad you chose me. We gotta change that mentality. We have to change that narrative. That way, we're not looking for somebody to give us something. We just want the door open so we can get it ourselves. Stop waiting for corporations and politicians to empower us. We have a blueprint. We can build, we can own, and we can sustain. We now are in a position where our generation, my generation in particular, we are one of the most educated generations that has been in this nation. We came from a people that were not allowed to read. We came from a people that were given less than adequate education. And now we find ourselves in Ivy League universities. We find ourselves in universities that we no longer were held out of. And we have to begin to understand what's there for us. We have to begin to understand what we have. Stop waiting for these corporations and politicians to empower us. Understand that the rich rule it over the poor, and the borrower is the servant to the lender, according to Proverbs 22:7. The rich rule it over the poor. And I heard Shaquille O'Neal say something years ago where somebody called him or classified him as being wealthy. And he said, I'm not wealthy yet. He said, I'm rich. He said, because I do have a lot of money. He said, but the person that's wealthy is the person that made me rich. Talking about the team owners. And now we see Shaq making moves, and he has various businesses that's open, and he's helping a lot of people. But he understood his position. He understood where he was. One of the things that we have to first do is identify ourselves. Socrates said, know thyself. So then we have to begin to pay attention to all of these things. Are we rulers or are we borrowers? Are we builders or are we beggars? So then I got to ask the question as I close this out. Are you creating something that can't be taken away? What steps are you taking to build, own, and sustain your own economic and social power? And as we answer those questions, I'm going to ask you to drop your thoughts. Do you agree that inclusion is a distraction? Put it in the comments. Let me know where your head is and what you're thinking. Because again, grace and grit, it needs to be a collective. It needs to be a dialogue. It's not just me giving you information or me just spitting out my thoughts and my sentiments. But I want to see where you are, where we are as a people, Black, white, Asian, Hispanic, Where are we? And do we really understand what's going on in our nation? Do we want somebody to give it to us? Or do we want them to open up the door and we get it ourselves? We just need the tools. I don't need you to build a house, but give me access to the tools and the building material, and I'll build it myself. So, again, if something resonated with you, leave a comment. Let me know where you at, where your head is. And until we meet again, keep grinding, my friend.